Dungeons and Dragons, D&D. Dungeons and Dragons is a collaborative storytelling tabletop role-playing game that since 2014 has seen a massive rise in popularity all across the world. D&D going from a game that was really long thought to be for nerds, theater kids, social degens, and even Satan worshippers, to a game that was for absolutely anyone and everyone, from the most Giga Chad jocks to the biggest celebrities and everyone else in between. However, despite how far Dungeons & Dragons has come in the last 10 years, D&D at times can't seem to escape its dark past of elitism, gatekeeping, sexism, and antisocial behavior. Hello everyone, I'm Finn, welcome back to Finn Films. Join me today as we take another dive down the rabbit hole that is Dungeons & Dragons horror stories, specifically the downfall of one of the biggest D&D content creators, dungeon masters of all time, the story of Arcanum. Arcanum's streaming and professional dungeon mastering career really seemed to come into prominence sometime between 2018 and 2019. At this time, Dungeons & Dragons was in a major upswing. A few years prior, Wizards of the Coast releasing D&D 5e, a simplification of their game set rules for Dungeons & Dragons, as well as the establishing of really several major Dungeons & Dragons content games, such as Critical Role, the most primary example, as well as a plethora of other games, such as Dice Camera Action, and the establishment of College Humor and what would become Dropout TV with many of the Brennan Lee Mulligan games. At this time, Arcanum had established a reputation as a very well-prepared dungeon master, a DM who pushed the slogan, D&D is for everyone, championing women's overshadowed role in the Dungeons & Dragons and tabletop RPG space. As for many years prior to this, really since Dungeons & Dragons' inception by Gary Gygax, D&D and tabletop role-playing games had really been kind of thought of as an old boys club. Arcanum seemingly at this time trying to really break this mold by going out of his way to feature many female content creators in his games and then giving them a prominent role in the story that was told. However, the motivation for the featuring of these women so prominently would very much come into question after his dramatic downfall just a few years later in 2021, but we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Arcanum had established himself early on as a very solid dungeon master with a real focus on bringing new players to the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop role-playing game space. One of the major highlights of his dungeon mastering style being his simplifying of the rules and mechanics of D&D for newer players through the use of a virtual tabletop such as Foundry or Forge, for example. Arcanum using these virtual tabletops to make a player's actions and abilities as easy as clicking a button, something that was very much appealing for newer players, as well as players with a video gaming background. As well, another major highlight of Arcanum's games was his ever-growing community of loyal fans, many of which fell in love with his world of Verum, a world he had created and the characters that inhabited it. His community being well known in the D&D space for their fan art, oftentimes extremely high-quality fan art that would be done in incredibly short periods of time. His community being able to pump out these works of fan arts before a session had even finished. Arcanum, though, really began to rise in prominence as a dungeon master and a streamer from his collaboration with many other content creators. For example, many well-known figures from the VR chat and VTuber community being consistent players in his games, along with many other high-profile streamers and YouTubers, for example, such as Sodapoppin, Moon, Iron Mouse, Disguised Toast, and many other content creators from the OTV organization. It was this game in particular, the game that featured Sodapoppin, Moon, and Shorefur, that I really became aware of Arcanum and his prominence in the Dungeons & Dragons space as a streamer, and it was arguably around this point, from 2019 to 2020, when his streaming career really began to take off. Arcanum going from a streamer who averaged anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 live concurrent viewers to a consistent 10 to 15,000 even, depending on which game he was running and which streamers streamers were featured in said game. At this time, Arcadum had arguably become the second biggest D&D live stream besides Matt Mercer's Critical Role. Arcadum at one point peaking at over 15,000 Twitch subscriptions, putting him in easily the top 1% of creators on this platform, causing many within his own fanbase to herald him as one of the Dungeon Master greats, putting him on the Dungeon Master Mount Rushmore next to legendary DMs like Matt Mercer, Brendan Lee Mulligan, and Chris Perkins. For some context, 15,000 Twitch subscribers translates to around a conservative estimate of $37,000 per month, and again, that's a conservative estimate. So then, you could see why so many people in his community would be absolutely shocked and horrified when it became apparent that this man, who had built a very large, invested community around this inclusive idea that Dungeons & Dragons is for everyone, turned out not to be the man that they thought he was. Now, I don't think anyone besides a maybe handful of people that were closest to Arcadum could have foretold the events that would play out in the summer of 2021. Of course, with hindsight, we can look back at some moments and some interactions throughout Arcadum's games, interactions with other content creators as well as his players, that at the very least could be seen as odd or cringe, but however, with context, become warning signs of a man who fancies himself as some sort of 5-head 3D chess-playing manipulative anime protag out of Death Note, rather than the wholesome, welcoming Dungeon Master D&D streamer that he had presented himself as. For example, in the summer of 2021, during Arcadum's downfall, a Reddit user named Throith, I think that's how you pronounce that, posted their own experience that they had in one of Arcadum's games long before Arcadum ever became a streamer on Twitch. Throith detailing the toxic playing environment of said game. Any players who were attempting to give helpful critiques were verbally insulted and attacked, Arcadum going to other members of the group to gossip about them behind their back. In-game, new NPCs would instantly be hostile towards that player's character, and mock or belittle them with no way for the character to respond without risking a TPK, or that player character's goals would be moved or taken away from them with no way to counteract it. Worse, he would hamper or injure another player's character and lay the blame on the character that he felt had slighted him, alienating that player from the rest of the group. The game was a toxic environment to play in, the largest example being what Arcadum called the Reaping. The Reaping entailed the party group losing magic items, plot points, storyline NPCs, and basically all progress because a player had to drop from the game, willingly or due to life circumstances. This is just one paragraph from a very long post detailing a lot of classic problematic DMing behavior from Arcadum. Of course, this took place long before he streamed, and in my opinion, the most troublesome of which being Arcadum's unwillingness to take criticism and how he spoke behind people's back in an attempt to manipulate them. Foreshadowing, anyone? Next, we need to cast our mind back to late summer 2021. Arcadum is arguably at the peak of his career and popularity, running a variety of games, from a game full of female VTubers to a game featuring only large content creators and streamers from the OTV organization, to possibly his most popular game featuring the streamers Moon, Soda Poppin', and Surefour. In the last few weeks of August 2021, Arcadum would suddenly remove and ban several women from his community, one of them being his friend as well as his employee, Kelly Siren. In Kelly's Twitlonger post that she would release at the end of August and early September 2021, she would say that the reason that she was given for being kicked from Arcadum's community was that his long-term fiance, which Arcadum oftentimes would refer to as his wife, her name being Tiffany, was made aware of a set of private messages between Arcadum and Kelly, as well as several other female content creators, as well as another one of his employees. In Kelly's Twitlonger, she details how her and Arcadum came to be close friends, Arcadum using the classic emotional pump and dump manipulator tactic to get close to her. Arcadum opened up to me about something really bad that happened in his relationship. He would ask for my support and would ask me to get on VR chat with him to listen and to help him. Things then started to shift a bit when he suggested I comfort him in more ways than just words. We do a little ERP. This is the beginning of the end for Arcadum. It would be made aware that Arcadum was engaging in this kind of relationship and behavior with a number of women behind his wife, fiance's back. This type of behavior being emotionally manipulative and abusive and pushing a certain kind of sexual type relationship onto many women, many of which felt that they could not say no because of the power dynamics between them and the manipulation that Arcanum engaged in, none of them knowing that there were all of these other women behind the scenes that Arcanum was engaging in this type of communication with. But you see, now they did. In Kelly's words, it was so many girls that we couldn't make a group chat and had to make a Discord in order to discuss what was going on. In the last week of August 2021, different streamers and colleagues who had worked with or collaborated with Arcanum all simultaneously released Twitlonger statements of their alleged experiences with him, experiences ranging from emotional manipulation to sexual harassment, and one allegation of SA. Most, if not all, providing some sort of Discord logs, as well as even some recorded voice conversations that all were extremely damning. The most common allegation being that Arcanum used his position of power and his position of friendship with many of these women to pressure them into emotional and sexually satisfying him, oftentimes through Discord calls or even through the video game VR chat. As one Twitch streamer, Azuri Mia, discusses in her statement, Arcanum would routinely pressure her for lap dances and erotic roleplay within VR chat, many of these other women echoing these same types of allegations, such as Lyra121 and even Kelly Siren, who we mentioned earlier, all of them echoing similar allegations in their own statements. Kelly even being an employee of Arcanum, along with another one of the victims named Cree, which brings in a whole nother problem of power dynamics. The large VTuber Momo wrote in her statement that Arcanum manipulated her and even groomed her. In her words, he twisted me to believe all of his words, no matter what we talked about. And if you read Momo's Twitlonger along with the Twitlongers of the other 21 women who all came forward and their copious amounts of logs and DMs with Arcanum, you begin to see the evident cycle of manipulation and abuse that Arcanum used, again in the words of the content creator Momo: anger, jealousy, sympathy farming, and then reassurance of his status. This was Arcanum's cycle of abuse. This exact same type of behavior and manipulative cycle repeated itself with many of these women in many different forms, but in essence, it is all the same. First, win the trust of these women and worm yourself into their DMs by showing a personal, softer side of yourself, oftentimes by explaining a emotionally distressful situation that might be occurring between Arcanum and his current fiance at the time, Tiffany. Once he had established a line of contact and friendship with these women, he would reach out to them, trying to push things farther into some sort of a sexual relationship. If he ever received an answer he didn't like or any sort of grievance, he would then be passive aggressive or just straight up aggressive, lashing out at them and the perceived grievance, oftentimes this grievance being jealousy or a feeling like he is being left out, even going so far in a case like Kelly's to message any guy that he thought she was talking to them to tell them to back off from her and that he was interested in her. Next, sympathy farm by making this person feel bad for you. The most common tactic he seemed to use was by venting about his personal relationship with his fiancée, Tiffany, at the time, or by lamenting about his loneliness, the fact that he doesn't find himself attractive, or possibly the fact that no one wanted to be friends with him. After emotionally manipulating and brain-fucking the person into believing that it is somehow their fault that he feels this way, he then finally reaffirms his position by apologizing and making sure that they were still close friends. For many people in Arcanum's community, when these 21 women all came forward at the same time with their Twitlongers and their mini logs detailing Arcanum's actions, this was just too much information to handle. This man, despite all of his very creepy and manipulative flaws, had somehow built a very thriving and positive community for many people, a place where many people, especially women, felt like they could actually be accepted for who they are. And now, all of that was completely crashing down on them, many people now questioning Arcanum's motives all along, these motives as to why he featured so many of these women prominently in his games. Reading these logs and these copious amount of DMs and chat interactions between Arcanum and these women, it gives you an idea of the type of manipulation and the fuckery that Arcanum was engaging with and up to. If you've ever dealt with an abusive relationship or an abusive person, manipulative person in your life, then reading these DMs, these things, is enough for you to be like, oh yeah, This guy is extremely calculated and manipulative. Again, mining through these DMs and reading all these chat interactions is one thing, but I think where Arcadum's actions really become evident that his abuse and his manipulation was calculated all along, and where it really hits home, is when you listen to him speak. The following is a slice of a voice recording between Arcadum and Naomi, one of the victims who came forward and released these voice logs in her TwitLonger statement. Obviously, Arcadum was completely unaware that he was being recorded in these voice calls, and to me, I think you can really get a better idea of really the sense of the manipulation tactics that he used happening in real time when you listen to it. The entire voice recording can be found in Naomi's TwitLonger statement, along with countless of other YouTube videos on the internet and the Internet Archive, so if you were so inclined to listen to the entire thing, it's really not that hard to find. For context, this voice call took place on January 11th, 2021, and begins with an argument between Naomi and Arcadum about some banter between the two that had gone completely wrong.
So when I said, you know, you don't get invited back to the parties, the perfect response would have been the same amount of parties you do, and that would have been fantastic, and I would have loved it, because that is how friendship is showed, especially, you know, amongst the crowd that I was hanging out with at the time. So now we move on to this point. I will no longer be bantering with you, because I have no way of knowing as to whether or not you're going to be able to take it, because I have been very, very careful leading up to this point on what you can and can't take, and it seemed like you could. I was wrong.
But this is what I'm saying.
What
like,
was your intention? That you would message me in the middle of the night after I was laying down saying that was uncalled for and too far? Like,
I wanted to tell you. I wanted to tell you.
Right? That's what you wanted.
Yes, but that doesn't mean
you
that
got it. So what else is there to talk about?
That doesn't mean that you need to completely like shut something down. Like
No. You don't get to decide what it means. I get to decide how I react to it. And the only way to ensure that you are not harmed again is to not include you. It's as simple as that.
So what I'm saying, Arcadum, is that I didn't perceive it as like you telling me that nobody likes me, because I understand that like what you were doing was banter, but the phrase like you don't get invited back to parties implies people don't like you enough to invite you back to parties, or something negative results in you not being invited back to parties.
If you take it past banter, it can mean that. So that fault is on you.
But like
me.
So I'm saying, what I'm saying is that like that phrase in and of itself did not feel like banter to me, because I don't take.
That's not my problem, is it?
I mean, wait. So
be stronger. My advice, or don't play.
Like, okay, this comment I didn't perceive as normal banter. That's why it was outside of the realm of the usual stuff that I'm always fine with. Like, that was my intention. It wasn't my intention to be like...
Well, that explains why Kelly left.
Well, her and I were going to hang out anyway, and I messaged her if she still wanted to hang out. I didn't message her talking about your shit.
Yeah, I'm going to have to deal with that later. Did you or did you not talk to her about what I said?
Yeah, but that was after.
Oh, now I'm going to pay for that.
What? No, dude, that was way after her and I had already started talking. That's not why she left.
Okay, well, here's the thing. You don't know her as well as I do. And if you think for a fact that what you've just done won't have rippling consequences, then you're wrong or naive. So, sorry. Like, now I have additional stress. Now I know I have to deal with that. And please don't message her trying to nip it in the bud, because that will just make it worse.
Arcadum continues with this kind of behavior on this voice call for a while, this guy being basically completely unable to take like any criticism or any real responsibility for his actions at all, constantly shifting the blame to Naomi and responding with aggression whenever she pushes back, even in like the lightest, softest of ways, until finally we get to this absolute gem of a moment from this voice call when you really see just like what is going through this guy's mind.
I mean, do you think that if you didn't do D&D that people wouldn't be friends with you? Like, that's not the case.
Yes. No. I know that's in fact, I can give you a percentage. It is actually, I believe it is 17.8% of the people that I run D&D for will continue to be my friends once the game is done. I have that number for you. I have made that calculation. I have made that calculation 4 separate occasions. The evidence is empirical. So, sorry. I believe it is 48% of you won't talk to me ever again.
Wait, what about the other percent?
Passing messages, not a real friendship. Now, those numbers are probably going to be more bloated onto the passivity due to my position as a streamer. I haven't done the recalculations based off of that yet, but I can tell you unequivocally that the use of D&D in order to make friends has a 17.8% retention rate. That's the tragedy that I live. So, I don't expect you to understand that. I don't bring it up because it just makes people feel awful. But that's the reality of it.
I mean, is that like for all DMs or for you specifically?
That's for me. I can't speak for all DMs.
Right.
That's for me specifically. But considering that that's the only measurement that matters is because it's me. I'm not someone else. So, yeah, that's me specifically.
Okay, but like, have you thought about why they wouldn't? Like, aside from the obvious clout chasers, because
oh no. This is before clout.
Okay.
This is before any of that. These measurements are based off my entire career. So, 17.8%.
Okay. Well, have you thought about why though?
Of course I have, Naomi. Please. Yes, I have. I have augmented behaviors. I have done experiments to determine why. I have tried to pick different ethnicities. I've tried to do different gender counts. I've done everything that was within my power to experiment, and that number has remained depressingly the same. So that's the way it is. It could just be because it's me.
If this does not sound like the ramblings of an egocentric man who has watched way too much fucking anime in his life, then I don't know what does. Look, my brother, your life is not this dramatic. The way that he talks about himself just screams a guy who, like, fancies himself this, like, Death Note protag, this Yagami Light-esque character, and Jesus fucking Christ, is it cringe? Huge shout out to Naomi, by the way. The way that she navigated this conversation is like completely masterful. The way that she dodged all of his manipulation, giving him the little head bob left in the right, and all of his cringe attempts to win her over with sympathy and this kind of like woe is me self-deprecating bait. She didn't take the bait once. I mean, the amount of times that he tries to re-angle this conversation to garner like any kind of sympathy is absolutely wild, and to her credit, she never falls for it once. Mind you, that these voice calls show a side of Arcanum that at the time no one really outside of those people who were closest to him ever truly really saw, and somehow it gets even worse when he finally goes full mask off.
People think that, oh, you're way too hard on yourself. I'm hard on myself in the way that I'm hard on myself because once, many years ago, I allowed myself to become arrogant, and I became the most evil version of myself that I have ever witnessed. Mm-hmm. It disgusted me. Because imagine, you know me enough now that you know what my abilities are. Uh-huh. Imagine if they had no temperance.
Right.
And I was selfish. Uh-huh. Imagine the destruction that I could wreak. But the thing is that I know that my influence is palpable and is naturally more destructive than most other people. Now, granted, recently I've been exposed to other people who also have that power at differing degrees and specializations. But from what I've noticed, with the exception of probably 2, mine is stronger than theirs. And I keep it in check. Because if I don't, I could really hurt someone. I normally don't talk about this kind of stuff because it makes people treat me differently. Mm-hmm. That's why I don't talk about it. They either don't believe me at all, and they think I'm a liar, I'm delusional, or even worse, they believe me and then they watch everything that they say around me. That's why I don't tell people it. That's also why I don't play Among Us.
We need to remember that this man's stream persona was this kind of like jovial, friendly, happy-go-lucky, like D&D loving nerd. I mean, to me, it was pretty obvious the guy was definitely a major weeb, that he watched too much anime. If you watched like any of the tropes and the themes of many of his Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, they just like streamed oftentimes like stereotypical tropey shonen. But again, No one outside of those closest to Arcanum had ever really seen any side of him remotely close to this that we hear in these voice calls, and it becomes very obvious very quickly why he would want to keep this side of himself hidden from his greater community at large.
I hope that in time, that they'll forgive me, even though I don't deserve it.
Well, you know better than most people that all actions have consequences. As a person who creates stories for hundreds of people, you know that all actions have consequences.
After these 21 women would come forward at the end of August 2021, Arcanum would quickly reply with a statement of his own being released on September 2nd, 2021. In his TwitLonger statement, he said this: "I have developed and engaged with a wide range of relationships with people over the years, some of them leading into sexual territories and times when I made mistakes and was selfish. I never sought out relationships purely for sexual purposes, and to be clear, I have never engaged in non-consensual activities. These were relationships that developed as genuine friendships, yet I have been unfair to many of them, and I am sorry for the hurt that I have caused them." He also said at the end of his statement that he would not be streaming while he attended therapy to work on these many personal issues. By personal issues, I can only assume he means the manipulative way he uses people and his sociopathic anime main character protag syndrome that he seemingly suffers from. But of course though, in classic Twitch streamer content creator fashion, 6 months later he was back and he was streaming, albeit to a much smaller audience. To me, it really does seem like the most likely reason he brought these women into his campaign and then featured them so prominently in his stories was so he could win them over as friends and then could eventually manipulate them and make advances on them, putting them in a situation where many felt like they couldn't say no because of how he would respond. In other situations, they felt they were unable to say no because of the power dynamics he held over them as their employer. Now, I'm no psychologist or psychiatrist, but I have had some extensive dealings with manipulative and abusive people in my life, and Arcanum to me fits the bill of a guy who definitely watched too much anime in his younger years and has a massive ego complex, where he views himself as this Yagami Light-esque character as well as God's gift to D&D, his ego only growing 9 times larger from the money, clout, and fame that he received in his Twitch streaming career.
All the stupid tropes, all the stupid anime shit that happened in our stupid fucking D&D games are all anime inspired, not military inspired, and were the product of someone who thought they were creative, literally stealing that from people who were themselves not creative. The fact that you could not see a tinge of the fanatical and stupid anime tier main character bullshit and anything that he said is insane to me, dude. The sensitivity when it came to comparing anything that he did to Naruto or Dragon Ball Z or anything is very telling about what he thought and what he did. If you couldn't see that, you just literally were not paying attention, dude.
His massive popularity was something that I never really honestly understood, as I always thought that he was a bit overrated as a dungeon master, to me many of his stories being largely inspired by anime tropes and themes. To me, what I think gave Arcanum his fame and his money and his clout was the dedication of his fan base and his community, as well as the interactions and the collaborations with other large content creators, many of which were completely new to D&D. I mean, this guy's ego was so large that he actually genuinely thought he never would get caught in his lies and manipulation and his about, and to be fair, I guess he did fuck around for years with 21 plus women who somehow managed to not find out about each other until literally the very end, literally a week prior to them releasing their statement at the end of August 2021. But hey, you know what they say, fuck around and find out, and even in his own words, all actions have consequences, something that he as a storyteller and D&D player and dungeon master should know better than others. Now, I need to say this, I didn't make this video in order to relitigate the Arcanum case or just to straight up shit on him and shame him. This guy has probably been through enough. He's lost his entire career as a result of his own stupidity, and in a mere matter of months went from being praised as the next Matt Mercer to being scorned as the next Adam Colville. But such is the world that we live in, where it takes years to claw your way to the top, but just a mere seconds to crash back down to the bottom again. No, I wanted to make this video for the same reasons that I've made all of my other D&D horror story videos so far, as a warning to dungeon masters and to players out there. We as humans have this amazing ability to find the patterns in things, sometimes to our own detriment. For example, if you touch a hot stove once or twice as a kid, you're probably never going to touch that stove again. You have one or two bad experiences playing Dungeons & Dragons, whether it's an asshole player or a creepy, horny DM, and that player will probably never give Dungeons & Dragons another chance again, which makes a lot of sense, but to me, that is extremely sad. Dungeons & Dragons is something extremely important to me. D&D has had such a positive influence on my life and many other people's lives around the world, as it teaches you teamwork and how to get along with one another, as well as how to be creative and how to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Dungeons & Dragons, when it's at its best, can be such an amazing experience. It can honestly be a life-altering, changing experience. But on the flip side, when Dungeons & Dragons is bad, well, it's real bad. Dungeons & Dragons horror stories are like nothing new. If you've played tabletop role-playing games long enough, you've probably experienced your own horror story, though hopefully one that's not nearly as insane as gross as the story in the downfall of Arcanum. The sad thing is, as large and as mainstream as Dungeons & Dragons has become, as it has become way more accepting and open to new ideas and new players and new people from all sorts of backgrounds and cultures, there will still be this shadow, this dark side to it, a seed of a time long past of elitism, gatekeeping, and sexism. I think that we as a community can only continue to make this space better, to make it more open and accepting by holding ourselves to a higher standard and by not shying away from the darkness of Dungeons & Dragons, by examining and looking at the darkest parts of the hobby and the space, and learning from these horror stories, learning from these people's mistakes, so we can make this community and the tabletop role-playing game space a better place for everyone. That is my goal when telling the story of Arcanum. If you did enjoy this video or learn something new, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, as that is the easiest way to help support me and to put these videos in the algorithm. If you did enjoy this video and you'd like to see other of my Dungeons & Dragons content, or maybe other of our D&D horror stories, like the story of Critical Role's forgotten player, Orion Akaba, then why don't you check out some of the other videos on screen now. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching and continuing to support me. I hope to see you in the next one. Drink your water, hug your mother. Until next time, peace, love, Adu.